Hello class, so today we will be starting our anatomy and physiology journey. So I hope you're all excited to learn what is a human organism and how do we function all the parts of our body. So let's start first with our unit 1, which is the human organism. So knowledge of the structure and the function of human body are essential for planning in any career in health sciences. It is the basis for understanding disease. Therefore, in this unit, anatomy and physiology are well defined, or we will be defining it later. The body's structural and functional organization, and an overview of the characteristics of life and homeostasis will also be catered. And finally, terminologies and body plane or plans are presented. Anatomy is the scientific discipline that investigates the body's structure. It describes the shape and sizes. It examines the relationship between the structures of body parts and its function. The structure of specific body part allows it to perform a particular function. Understanding the relationship between the structure and function would make it easier to understand and appreciate anatomy. Meanwhile, physiology means the scientific investigation of the process or functions of living things. The major goal of physiology are to understand and predict the body's response to stimuli and to understand how the body maintains conditions within a narrow range or values in a constantly changing environment. The study of human body would encompass both anatomy and physiology because structures, functions, and processes are connected or interlinked with each other. So what is the importance of anatomy and physiology? First thing, when you say anatomy and physiology, it is a branch of science that investigates organs, bones, structures, and cells that exist in animals, both animals and human beings. Therefore, when you say anatomy and physiology, it would provide us a basic knowledge about the human body. It helps us understand clearly the fundamental concept as to how our own body functions well. So for us to be able to understand our own body function, we must be able to know, or this is another reason of the importance of anatomy and physiology is that it would we would understand how our body would respond to stimuli, to any environmental changes, any environmental signals or cues, diseases, and injuries. Now, there are levels of organization in our body. We do have the atoms, molecules, organelles, cell, tissue, organ system, and organism. The first is the chemical level. Chemical level involves interactions between atoms, which are tiny building blocks of matter. Second level is our cell level. Cells are the basic structural and fundamental units of organisms. Atoms combine to form a molecule. Molecules can combine to form organelles, such as the nucleus and mitochondria, which make up a cell. Cell has long been recognized as the simplest units of living matter that can maintain life and reproduce themselves. Next is the tissue level. Tissues are somewhat more complex units than cells. By definition, a tissue is an organization of a great many similar cells with varying amounts and kinds of non-living intercellular substance between them. The numerous different tissues that make up the body are classified into four basic types: epithelial, connective, and muscle and nervous. Then next is the organ level. Organs are more complex units than tissues. An organ is an organization of several different kinds of tissues, of at least two types of tissues. So they are arranged together that they can perform a special function. For example, the stomach is an organization of muscle, connective, epithelial, and nervous tissues. Muscle and connective tissues form its wall, epithelial and connective tissues form its lining, and nervous tissue extends throughout both its wall and its lining. Next is the organ system level or organism level. An organ system level is a group of organs that have a common function or a set of functions and are therefore viewed as a unit. Example, urinary system, which compose the kidney, ureter, urinary bladder, and urethra. And there are several or 11 major organ systems that compose the human body. Now let's go now to the types of anatomy. So we do have the systemic anatomy. So when you say systemic anatomy, this is the evaluation or evaluates the body by defined systems. Let's say, for example, integumentary system, musculoskeletal, nervous or endocrine, circulatory, respiratory system. When you say regional anatomy, this organizes the body into different parts, upper limb, lower limb, back, thorax, and so on and so forth. While surface anatomy is the study of the external features of the body of a human being or an animal. So surface anatomy, again, is the study of the external features of the body. So the surface regions of the body have received their names in a variety of ways. Let's say, for example, the palm of the hand. So that's the surface, no? The sole of the foot and the nape of the neck. So these are the surfaces. Anatomical imaging would allow the medical personnel to look inside the body with amazing accuracy and without the trauma and risk of exploratory surgery. So this is very common to all, like x-rays, ultrasounds, magnetic resonance imaging. So that's where you can view using an MRI that's more high-tech, no? You can really see tissues, no? Inside the body of the human without even slicing or doing a surgical incision just to view the tissues inside the body. Now let's move to the major organs of the body. So the first is the brain. So the brain is the control center of the nervous system and is located within the skull. Its functions includes muscle control and coordination, sensory reception and integration, speech production, memory storage, and the elaboration of thought and emotion. Next, we have the lungs. Now, the lungs are two sponge-like and cone-shaped structures that fill most of the chest cavity. Their essential function is to produce or provide oxygen from inhaled air to the bloodstream and to the exhaled carbon dioxide. Next is the liver, which lies on the right side of the abdominal cavity beneath the diaphragm. Its main function is to process the contents of the blood to ensure composition remains the same. This process involves breaking down fats, producing urea, filtering harmful substances, and maintaining a proper level of glucose in the blood. Next is the bladder. The bladder is a muscular organ located in the pelvic cavity. It stretches to store urine and contracts to release urine. Next is the kidney. Kidneys are two bean-shaped organs located at the back of the abdominal cavity, one on each side of the spinal column. Their function is to maintain the body's chemical balance by excreting waste products and excess fluid in the form of urine. Next is the heart. The heart is a hollow muscular organ that pumps blood through the blood vessels by repeated rhythmic contractions. Next, we have the stomach. The stomach is a muscular, elastic, pear-shaped bag lying crosswise in the abdominal cavity beneath the diaphragm. Its main purpose is digestion of food through production of gastric juices, which break down, mix, and churn the food into a thin liquid. Next are the intestines. Intestines are located between the stomach and the anus and are divided in two major sections, the small intestine and the large intestine. The function of the small intestine is to absorb most ingested food. The large intestine is responsible for absorption of water and excretion of solid waste material. Next is your gallbladder. Small and pear-shaped, the gallbladder sits in the right upper quadrant of the abdomen, just under the liver. It contains cholesterol, bile salts, bile, and bilirubin. In a healthy person, the liver releases bile into the gallbladder, which the gallbladder stores and then releases to travel down the common bile duct into the small intestine to aid digestion. Next, we have the pancreas, located in the upper left portion of the abdomen. The pancreas has two important roles. Its function as both as an exocrine gland and an endocrine gland. And as an exocrine gland, the pancreas produces enzymes a person needs to help digest their food and convert it into energy. Those enzymes include amylase, lipase, trypsin, and cytotrypsin. In its role as an endocrine gland, the pancreas also produces and releases insulin, which helps the body remove glucose from the blood and convert it into energy. Spleen is a small organ inside your left rib, just above the stomach. It's part of the lymphatic system. The spleen stores and filters blood and makes white blood cells that protect you from infection. A spinal cord is a long tube-like band of tissue. It connects your brain to your lower back. Your spinal cord carries nerve signals from your brain to your body and vice versa. These nerve signals help you feel sensations and move your body. Any damage to your spinal cord can affect your movement or function. Next, we have the organ systems of the body. So we have the integumentary system that provides protection, regulates temperature, prevents water loss, and help produce vitamin D. Consists of your skin, hair, nails, sebaceous glands, and sweat glands. Next, we have your skeletal system. This provides protection and support, allows body movements, produces blood cells, and stores minerals and adipose tissues, consists of bones, associated cartilages, ligaments, and joints. Next, we have your muscular system, which produces body movements, maintains posture, and produces body heat. It consists of muscles attached to the skeleton by tendon. Next, we have the nervous system. This is a major regulatory system that detects sensations and control movements, physiological processes, and intellectual functions. This consists of the brain, spinal cord, nerves, and sensory receptors. Your endocrine system, this is a major regulatory system that influences metabolism, growth, reproduction, and many other functions. This consists of endocrine glands such as the pituitary gland that secretes hormones. Next is the cardiovascular system. So the cardiovascular system pumps the blood from the heart to the lungs to get oxygen. The heart then sends oxygenated blood through arteries to the rest of the body. The veins carry oxygen, pour blood back to the heart to start the circulation process over again. Next, we have the lymphatic system. This removes foreign substances from the blood and lymph, combats disease, maintains tissue fluid balance, and absorbs dietary fats from the digestive tract. Consists of the lymphatic vessels, lymph nodes, and other lymphatic organs. Next is your respiratory system. This exchanges oxygen and carbon dioxide between the blood and air and regulates blood pH. This consists of the lungs and respiratory passages. Next is your digestive system. This performs the mechanical and chemical processes of digestion, absorption of nutrients, and elimination of wastes. This consists of the mouth, esophagus, stomach, intestine, and accessory organs. Urinary system removes waste products from the blood and regulates blood pH, ion balance, and water balance. Consists of your kidney, urinary bladder, urethra, and your ureters. Next is your female reproductive system. Reproductive or produces oocytes and is the site for fertilization and fetal development, produces milk for the newborn, produces hormones that influence sexual function and behaviors, consists of the ovaries, uterine tubes, uterus, vagina, mammary gland, and associated structures. Next is your male reproductive system, which consists of a number of sex organs that play a role in the process of human reproduction. These organs are located on the outside of the body and within the pelvis. Now, what are the characteristics of life? All living organisms have certain characteristics that distinguish them from non-living forms. The basic processes of life include organization, metabolism, responsiveness, movements, and reproduction. In humans, who represent the most complex form of life, there are additional requirements such as growth, differentiation, respiration, digestion, and excretion. All of these processes are interrelated. No part of the body, from the smallest cell to a complete body system, works in isolation. So they work together and well coordinated with each other. All function together in fine-tuned balance for the well-being of the individual and to maintain life. First is organization. At all levels of organizational scheme, there is a division of labor. Each component has its own job to perform in cooperation with others. Even a single cell, if it loses its integrity or organization, will die. Next is your metabolism. It is a broad term that includes all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. One phase of metabolism is catabolism, in which complex substances are broken down into simpler building blocks and energy is released. Anabolism is said when two or more atoms, ions, or molecules combine to form new and larger molecules. Next, responsiveness. Responsiveness or irritability is concerned with detecting changes in the internal or external environments and reacting to that change. It is the act of sensing a stimulus and responding to it. Next is growth. Growth refers to an increase in size, either through an increase in the number of cells or through an increase in the size of each individual cell. In order for growth to occur, anabolistic or anabolic processes must occur at a faster rate than catabolistic process. Next is the development. So what is development? It is a process that creates growth, progress. It's more than growth. It involves what? Progress, positive change, or the addition of physical or economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. No? So the purpose of development is a rise in the level and the quality of life of a person. Next is reproduction. For most people, reproduction refers to the formation of a new person, the birth of a baby. In this way, life is transmitted from one generation to the next through reproduction of the organism. In a broader sense, reproduction also refers to the formation of new cells, from the replacement and repair of old cells as well as for growth. This is cellular reproduction. Both are essential to the survival of human race. Let's go now to the topic homeostasis. Homeostasis is the existence and maintenance of a relatively constant environment within the body. For cells to function normally, the volume, temperature, and the chemical content conditions known as variables must remain within a narrow range. Homeostasis mechanisms such as sweating or shivering normally maintain body temperature near an ideal normal value or set point. So examples of variables: body temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, blood glucose levels, blood cell counts, and respiratory rates. So in homeostasis, we have to understand what do you mean by normal range. Normal range, commonly in medical term, are set of values that a doctor uses to interpret a patient's, let's say for example, test results or vital signs. Now for that matter, body temperature, what is the normal range? So that would be our basis for us to assess the condition of the patient. Set point, this is a normal or average value of a variable. Over time, body temperature fluctuates around a set point. Set points for some variables can be temporarily adjusted depending on body activities as needed. Example, body temperature, common cause of change is fever. Heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rate, common cause of change would be if you perform exercise. That will increase your heart rate, that will also increase your blood pressure and your respiration. Let's move now to the negative feedback. The organ systems help control the body's internal environment so that it remains relatively constant. Most systems of the body are regulated by negative feedback mechanisms, which maintains balance or homeostasis. Negative feedback mechanisms keep body conditions within a set normal range by reversing any upward or downward shift. So the components of a feedback are receptors that detects changes in variables, control centers receives receptor signals, establish set point, send signal to effector, and the third one is the effector, directly causes change in variables. So let's take, for example, this illustration. We start off with number one, which is the receptor. So please direct your vision or to the receptor or number one. Receptor monitors the value of a variable. In this case, receptors in the skin monitor body temperature. Then it goes to number two. Information about the value of the variable is sent to a control center. In this case, nerves send information to the part of the brain responding for regulating body temperature. Then we have the control center or your part of the brain. The control center compares the value of the variable against the set point. Then moves now to the fourth process. So if a response is necessary to maintain homeostasis, the control center causes an effector to respond. In this case, nerves send information to the sweat glands. Then an effector produces a response that maintains homeostasis. In this case, stimulating sweat glands lowers body temperature. Now let's go to the positive feedback system. This tends to strengthen or reinforce a change in one's body's controlled condition. So positive feedback mechanisms occur when the initial stimulus further stimulates the responses. For instance, system response causes progressive deviation away from the set point outside of normal range, not directly used for homeostasis. Some positive feedback occurs under normal conditions like childbirth, generally associated with injury disease, and negative feedback mechanisms unable to maintain homeostasis. So this is the comparison of negative feedback and positive feedback. So the difference between positive and negative feedback differs in terms of frequency, no, of positive and negative feedback. As compared to positive feedback, negative feedback occurs more frequently amongst the body's homeostatic mechanisms, as many diseases is caused by the disruption of original systemic state. It is then more familiar, while positive feedback is less observed as it is less intuitive. In terms of mechanism of positive feedback supports a higher rate of production or process as an action likewise increases. Thus, the result of a reaction is magnified. On the other hand, negative feedback inhibits the rate as a certain state is enhanced. Hence, the result of a reaction is inhibited. When it comes to stability, as compared to positive feedback, negative feedback is more closely associated with stability as it lessens the effects of an agitation. On the contrary, positive feedback supports exponential growth, which may lean towards instability. In terms of change, no, negative feedback generally resists changes as it makes adjustments to bring back the system to its original state. On the other hand, positive feedback usually supports change as a small effect is enhanced. When it comes to range, as compared to negative feedback, positive feedback has a wider range as the process rate could get exponentially multiplied. Similarly, the range is reflected when positive feedback results to more products as more hormones, platelets, and the like. On the contrary, negative feedback leads to less products. Let's move now to the anatomical positions. So, anatomical position refers to a person standing erect with face directed forward, as you can see in the illustration in the screen. The upper limbs hanging to the sides and the palm of the hands facing forward. A person is supine when lying face upward and prone when lying face downward. The organism or the human being has three axes: the cephalocaudal axis, the anteroposterior axis, and the left axis. Directional terms describe the positions of structures related to other structures or location of the body. We have the superior or cranial, that means towards the head end of the body. Upper, let's say for example, hand is part of the superior extremity. Inferior or caudal, away from the head or lower. Example, the foot is part of the inferior extremity. When you say anterior or ventral, that refers to front. Example, the kneecap is located at the anterior side of the leg. When you say posterior or dorsal, that refers to back. That's the opposite of your anterior. For example, the shoulder blades, that's one. The shoulder blades are located on the posterior side of the body. And when you say medial, medial is toward the midline of the body. Example, the middle toe or your middle finger is located at the medial side of your foot or your hands. Next terminology we have is the lateral. That's away from the midline of the body. Example, the little toe is located at the lateral side of the foot. When you say proximal, toward or nearest the trunk or the center, or the point of the origin of the body part. Example, proximal end of the femur joints with the pelvic bone. So when you say proximal, going to the center of the body. When you say distal, that's away from the center of the body. So this is the most distal part of my body. That's the farthest from the trunk or the point or origin of a part. Let's say the hand is located at the distal end of the forearm. When you say superficial, toward or on the surface, now meaning the skin is superficial to the muscle. Deep, when you say the word deep, away from the surface or internal. So the lungs are deep to the ribs. The directional terms superior, inferior, anterior, posterior are useful for humans only. These surfaces are different in the other or quadrupeds. The remaining terms will be discussed in the next slide. So we do have what we call, I may mention this, no? Superior, inferior, anterior, and posterior. So we have differentiated that from the previous. So I have already mentioned these terminologies in the earlier part of the slides, no? So when we say medial, close to the midline, closest to the midline, lateral, away from the midline, proximal, going to the center of the body or closest to the center of the body, distal is the farthest away from the center of your body. Superficial, structure close to the surface, and the deep, which is towards the interior of the body. So we do have learned all of these directional signs or terminologies. Body planes, no? We have the sagittal plane, separates the body into the right and left side. Medial plane, a sagittal plane along the midline that divides body into equal left and right halves. Transverse plane, as you can see in the screen, a horizontal plane that separates the body into superior and inferior part, and frontal plane, a vertical plane that separates the body into anterior, which is the front part, and posterior, which is the back part. If you would like to undergo to tests like MRI, CT scan, we can actually appreciate these planes. Now you can actually see the different slices. If you undergo CT scan, MRI, you would appreciate and see or view the different transverse, sagittal planes, and so on. This is another view wherein you would appreciate the different planes if you try to dissect an organ. No? So this is your intestine. So you can see longitudinal section in this first slide or plane. And then we have the transverse section, which you can see how it would appear, no, below the arrow, the blue arrow. And then the oblique section, wherein you can actually view whatever assessment you'd like to see in the patient. We do have the body regions, and this is very important. We do have the upper limbs, which composes your upper arm, forearm, wrists, and hands. Lower limbs, this refers to your thighs, your lower leg, ankle and foot, and your central region, which is your head, neck, and trunk. No? So these are the central regions. Here we would appreciate more the details, no? So when you say upper limb, no, this composed of your brachial arm, axilla, clavicles, collarbones, your head, your neck is more of the trunk or the mid areas, no? And then you have your lower limbs. And then you have your upper limb, which is located at the, we could see now the posterior side or the back part. Now because in nursing, you have to really use the medical terms in terms of assessing your patient, documenting in your chart and referring to the physician. That's why you have to know all these terminologies and those with combination. Let's say posterior part of the arm. So which part of the arm? The back part. Subdivisions of the abdomen. So if we do assess our patient, this is how we would subdivide our abdomen. No? So we do have the right, left, upper quadrant, and the right and the lower quadrant. And if you want to have more specific regions, we have the right hypochondriac region, epigastric region from the topmost, and then your left hypochondriac. Then you go to the center part, no? Right lumbar region, umbilical region, and left lumbar region. And then the lower is the right iliac region, hypogastric region, and then your left iliac region. Then we have our body cavities. Body cavities or spaces of the body contains the internal organs or viscera. The two main cavities are called the ventral and dorsal cavities. The ventral is the larger cavity and is subdivided in two parts. Now we have the thoracic and the abdominopelvic cavities by the diaphragm, a dome-shaped respiratory muscle. So it is a thoracic cavity, the upper ventral thoracic or chest cavity contains the heart, lungs, trachea, esophagus, large blood vessels, and nerves. The thoracic cavity is bound laterally by the ribs and the diaphragm caudally. And we also have the mediastinum, space between the lungs, contains your heart, thymus gland, esophagus, and trachea. The abdominal cavity, space between the diaphragm and your pelvis, contains stomach, intestine, livers, spleen, pancreas, and kidneys. And we have your pelvic cavity, space within pelvis, contains urinary bladder, reproductive organ, parts of the large intestine. Serous membranes. Serous membranes are covered by a thin layer of serous fluid that is secreted by the epithelium. Serous fluid lubricates the membrane and reduces friction and abrasion when organs in the thoracic or abdominal pelvic cavity move against each other or the cavity wall. Let's say your knees, no? So your knees has serous membrane so that your kneecaps won't have that friction together, you know. So we do have the visceral serous membranes that covers the organs. Parietal serous membrane is outer the membrane, and cavity, a fluid-filled space between the membranes, the one that we have discussed earlier. So let's say, for example, your heart, no? So we do have the pericardium around the heart, and we do have the pericardial cavity. In terms of the lungs, we do have your pleura around the lungs and pleural cavity. And in your peritoneum, in your abdominal area, no, peritoneum around abdominopelvic cavity and its organs, and it's called peritoneal cavity. In terms of your heart, no, it's really well protected. No, we do have the visceral pericardium covers the heart. Parietal pericardium, it's thick and fibrous, and we do have the pericardial cavity that reduces frictions. Same thing with your lungs, no? So it has parietal pleura, visceral pleura, pleural cavity containing pleural fluid, and before you go to the lungs, no? So it really lessens the friction, covers your lungs, and protects your lungs. Peritoneum, no? So in your abdominal area, no? So visceral peritoneum covers anchors organ double layers called mesenteries, no? So we do have that. Parietal peritoneum lies inner wall of your abdominal pelvic cavity. Peritoneal cavity will also reduce your friction. With that, thank you so much for listening, and that is our basics in anatomy and physiology. I hope you've learned from the terminologies that is very essential as we go further, as we advance more to our next lesson. Thank you and God bless.